Right now, as you watch this video, more than 300 projectiles have been launched in under 20 minutes. At least 7 separate Israeli air defense batteries have been forced into simultaneous engagement, and for the first time since October 7, 2023, multiple interception gaps have been confirmed across central Israel. Not a malfunction, not a shortage, but saturation. At exactly 02:14 a.m. local time, radar screens that had been stable for months began to flicker, not with noise but with precision. Drones first, then cruise missiles, then ballistic trajectories layered behind them like a second shadow. 3 waves, 3 altitudes, 1 objective: overwhelm the system, because modern air defense is not a wall. It is a nervous system, and like any nervous system, it can be flooded. In less than 11 minutes, according to early reporting from Reuters and confirmed by Israeli Channel 12, interception rates dropped below 82% in at least 2 sectors, a number that sounds high until you realize what the remaining 18% represents. Impact. Silence followed. Not the silence of calm, but the silence after alarms stop making sense. The kind where operators are no longer choosing what to intercept, but what to let through. And here is the part nobody is saying out loud. This was not about destruction. It was a test, a live fire calibration of limits. And if that is true, then what happens next is not escalation. It is iteration, and you are not prepared for what that means. Israel's air defense is not failing because it is weak. It is being forced to fail because it is being mathematically outpaced. That is the thesis. Not a collapse of technology, not a sudden gap in capability, but a deliberate strategy designed to exploit something far more dangerous than a missile strike: the arithmetic of saturation. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how this happened, and more importantly, why it was always going to happen. We will break down the precise sequence of events that turned one of the most advanced, multi-layered defense systems in the world into a system forced to make impossible choices. And then we will map the 2 paths forward, one that leads to a fragile containment and one that leads to a slow, irreversible expansion of conflict across the region. Because this is not just about Iran, and it is not just about Israel. This is about the moment modern warfare crosses a threshold where defense no longer guarantees safety. It only delays consequences. If you want to stay ahead of this story, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because the next 72 hours of this situation are going to move fast, faster than most people can process, and being even 48 hours behind on this could mean misunderstanding everything. Let us go back to April 18th, 2026, 01:52 a.m., Southern Air Corridor just west of Negev Desert. The sky was empty. No sirens, no alerts, civilian traffic asleep, air defense crews rotating through routine night protocols, monitors dimmed, coffee cooling, the quiet hum of systems that had, for months, performed almost flawlessly. Nothing unusual. That was the illusion, because for years the dry timber had been stacking, not in headlines, but in budgets, doctrines, and quiet procurement orders. According to the Pentagon's 2025 regional assessment, Iran and its aligned networks had increased low-cost drone production by over 240% in 36 months. The Reuters confirmed in January 2026 that individual attack drones being deployed across the region could cost as little as $20,000 per unit. Now compare that. Each interceptor missile used by systems like Iron Dome is estimated between $40,000 and $50,000 per Tamir interceptor. Higher-tier systems like David's Sling can exceed $1 million per interception. And the long-range layer, Arrow 3, operates in the $2–3 million per shot range. Stop. Read that again. A $20,000 drone forcing a $2 million response. That is not an exchange. That is erosion. At 02:14 a.m., the first radar anomaly appeared. Small signatures, slow-moving, likely drones, nothing unusual in isolation. Then more appeared. Then dozens. Engines off, signals low, coordinated spacing. And then, behind them, faster returns, cruise missiles, then ballistic arcs climbing high enough to trigger upper-tier systems. 3 layers, 1 timeline. This was not chaos. This was choreography, because the airspace over southern Israel is not just territory. It is the circulatory system of the entire defense architecture, feeding data, distributing interception priorities, managing response sequencing in real time. And at 02:17 a.m., that system was no longer responding. It was reacting, received. Revelation number 1. This was not a strike designed to destroy Israeli air defense. It was designed to map its breaking point in real time. According to early assessments from Reuters, corroborated by BBC News and preliminary briefings cited by CNN, the attack involved over 300 aerial threats deployed across a compressed time window of under 20 minutes. That is not volume for spectacle. That is volume for saturation. Here is what matters. Israel's layered defense, Iron Dome for short range, David's Sling for medium range, and Arrow 3 for ballistic threats, was forced into simultaneous engagement across all tiers. That is not how the system is optimized to fight. It is designed for prioritization. It was forced into concurrency. Dollar for dollar, the imbalance becomes brutal. Roughly $6 million worth of low-cost drones and cruise platforms triggered defensive responses estimated by analysts cited in the New York Times to exceed $700 million in interceptor expenditure within minutes. Read that again. This is not just a battlefield exchange. It is a financial exhaustion strategy. Now layer in timing. At 02:19 a.m., multiple batteries reportedly entered what defense analysts call engagement queuing delay, a moment where incoming threats exceed the system's ability to assign interceptors in optimal sequence. The result is not failure. It is prioritization under pressure, and prioritization means something gets through. A senior official speaking to Al Jazeera described it this way: the system performed within design expectations under abnormal load conditions. His words, not mine. Translation: the system did not break. It was forced into choosing outcomes it was never meant to face. And here is the part almost no outlet is emphasizing. This was coordinated across multiple vectors, south, southwest, and offshore corridors, forcing radar allocation and interceptor distribution across geographic spread, not just volume density. Re-listen to that, because it means this was not just a stress test of capacity. It was a stress test of decision-making speed under distributed pressure. That is revelation number 1, and we are just getting started. Revelation number 2, and this one nobody saw coming. At 02:23 a.m., just 9 minutes after the first wave began, the city of Beersheba was still asleep. Streetlights glowing amber, balconies empty. A school courtyard painted with bright blues and sun-faded yellows sat completely still. Inside nearby apartment blocks, families were in that deepest part of sleep, the kind where alarms don't immediately register as real. Then the sirens came. Not gradual, not isolated, layered, continuous, disorienting. According to initial emergency service reports cited by BBC News and Reuters, at least 18 impact points were recorded across civilian-adjacent zones within a 14-minute window. Not direct targeting of population centers, but close enough that the distinction collapses under physics, because interception gaps do not choose what they hit. They only define what gets through. One of those locations was a residential block near Rager Boulevard. A 9-year-old child, Noam Levi, was pulled from debris alongside her father after a partial structural collapse caused by shockwave fragmentation from a nearby interception failure. Emergency responders described the scene in language that is unusually restrained even for crisis reporting. That restraint matters, because what they did not say is just as important as what they did. He said structural damage. He did not say blast displacement. That was not an accident. Let that land. Hospitals in the region, according to CNN, shifted into emergency surge protocols within 22 minutes, treating over 70 civilians for injuries ranging from shrapnel wounds to acute trauma response. And here is the deeper fracture. Most of those injuries were not from direct hits. They were from near misses, from interceptions that succeeded, but too close, from fragments that still fall. This is the part the mainstream framing often misses. Modern air defense does not eliminate danger. It redistributes it, and in that redistribution, civilians absorb what systems cannot fully contain. If you want coverage that does not sanitize this reality, subscribe now, because these moments, these names, these details, they disappear fast in the next news cycle, and once they disappear, so does accountability. So here is the question. When a system works exactly as designed and people still end up here, what exactly are we calling success? Revelation number 3, and this one is about what is happening to the institution itself. Because systems do not reach moments like this overnight. They arrive here through layers of decisions, stacked, justified, defended, until the system can no longer distinguish between resilience and exposure. Here is the list: delayed interceptor procurement approvals, budget reallocations toward offensive capabilities in 2024-2025, over-reliance on predictive threat modeling algorithms, reduced redundancy in southern radar coverage zones, public confidence messaging prioritizing deterrence optics over vulnerability disclosure, joint command friction between Air Force and ground-based interception units, compressed training cycles for new operators due to manpower strain. No commentary, that is the pattern. According to reporting cross-referenced by the New York Times and Reuters, internal assessments had already flagged saturation vulnerability under multi-vector attack scenarios as early as mid-2025. The warning existed, it just did not dominate policy. Now add timing. A senior defense official was, according to publicly available schedules cited by CNN, attending a strategic technology forum less than 18 hours before the escalation window began, discussing AI integration in battlefield systems. That is not a punchline. That is a documented fact, because institutions drift, not through betrayal, but through alignment with their own internal incentives. Connect this back. Revelation 1 showed a system forced into impossible mathematical choices. Revelation 2 showed who absorbs the consequences of those choices, and this is the layer that explains both. Say that again. The system did not collapse under pressure. It performed exactly as its structure allowed. And that structure was built on assumptions that no longer hold. That is not how you win wars. That is how you lose them. These were not disloyal actors. They were loyal to the system, and that is the thing that got them here. Now let us talk about the strategic logic Iran is applying in this escalation, because this is not conventional warfare in the old sense. This is attrition through overload, a doctrine built on one uncomfortable truth. Modern air defense systems are not defeated by breaking them, but by making them choose too often, too fast, with too many simultaneous inputs. The logic is simple and brutal. Force interception queues to collapse under time pressure. Force high-cost responses against low-cost inputs. Force decision paralysis across layered defense architecture. Historically, you can see echoes of this in the Battle of Thermopylae, where terrain, not strength, decided endurance, or in the Battle of the Atlantic, where German U-boats did not need to win every engagement. They only needed to stretch Allied logistics until pressure became unsustainable. This is the modern equivalent. Not territory, not occupation, but system strain. Now apply compound collapse theory. Each wave of low-cost drones forces interceptor depletion. Each interceptor depletion increases radar prioritization errors. Each error increases penetration probability for the next wave. Each cycle does not end the system. It weakens the next cycle's resistance. That is compounding instability. Now look at global reaction, or the absence of it. The United States issued calibrated statements of support for defensive readiness. The European Union called for de-escalation and restraint. China emphasized regional stability and dialogue. 3 positions: no operational intervention. And the silence from several Gulf actors is even more telling. No escalation alignment, no deterrent signaling, just measured distance. Silence is evidence here, because silence in moments like this is not absence. It is calculation. Meanwhile, energy markets in early trading windows showed immediate sensitivity, oil futures reacting within minutes of confirmation, reflecting how quickly perception of regional instability translates into global pricing risk. If this video helps you understand what most headlines flatten, share it, because what looks like a regional exchange is actually a stress test of multiple global systems operating at once. And the actors who might stabilize escalation have gone home, while the system being tested sits exactly where it was, undisturbed, watching. Now let us talk about what this means for you personally, because this is where the story stops being about governments and starts becoming about daily life. When escalation like this enters a region, it does not stay contained on maps. It moves through supply chains, insurance models, and energy pricing systems that are already under strain. First, fuel. Brent crude reacted within hours of escalation signals. with volatility spikes historically translating into 3% to 7% short-term price swings during comparable Middle East flare-ups, according to past market behavior tracked by financial analysts at Reuters and commodity desks referenced by BBC News. That does not sound dramatic until it filters into transport costs and food logistics, then electricity. In import-dependent energy markets, even a $5, $10 per barrel sustained increase can raise generation costs enough to shift monthly household bills by noticeable margins. Not instantly, but cumulatively. That is already in your wallet, not a forecast, a transmission. Now groceries, wheat, cooking oil, and fertilizer-linked goods move through shipping routes that are extremely sensitive to regional insurance premiums. When risk rises, insurance follows. When insurance rises, shipping costs rise. When shipping costs rise, retail adjusts quietly, incrementally, invisibly at first. And there is a less obvious layer: data infrastructure. Major cloud and AI compute routes increasingly rely on undersea cable stability and regional routing redundancies that are indirectly affected by geopolitical escalation risk premiums. Even sectors like AI data centers in Europe and Asia adjust latency routing and cost models based on perceived regional instability in the Middle East corridor. The system is not insulated from the chaos, it is downstream from it. Even jobs feel it, through delayed investment decisions, tightened corporate risk models, and slower expansion cycles. The escalation did not create that uncertainty, it just made it impossible to ignore. There is a genuine restraint argument that requires honest acknowledgement. Presenting only one side of this would be the kind of analysis we criticize in other outlets, and this channel is not going to do that. The argument is simple. Israel's air defense system still achieved a high interception rate overall, and despite localized penetrations, the majority of incoming threats were neutralized. In other words, this was not a breakdown. It was a managed defense under extreme conditions. Fair point. We report it. In fact, early figures cited by CNN and corroborated in part by Reuters suggest interception success rates remained in the upper band of effectiveness for layered defense systems, which on paper indicates operational continuity rather than failure. But here is what military analysts understand that headline summaries often miss. High interception rate does not automatically equal strategic stability. It can also mask cost asymmetry and system fatigue accumulation, where each successful interception still consumes limited resources at a disproportionate economic cost. The surface metric is effectiveness. The structural metric is sustainability, and those are not the same thing. A system can win tactically while still moving closer to strategic strain if the input cost remains structurally lower than the output response cost. So yes, defense performance held, but at what long-term exchange rate? The question is not whether the system worked that night. The question is whether it can keep working at that pace, under that density, without changing the underlying equation, because equations like this do not fail loudly. They fail through repetition, and repetition is already part of the pattern. So where does this leave us? Let me give you two clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. Containment through adaptation. In this scenario, escalation does not spiral. It stabilizes through rapid adaptation, but it requires a very specific sequence. Immediate diplomatic backchannels between Iran, Israel, and intermediaries through regional actors. Rapid recalibration of air defense doctrine to prioritize distributed interception efficiency, emergency resupply, and interceptor production scaling through U.S. and allied industrial support. A temporary pause in multi-vector strike operations from Iranian-aligned groups. Establishment of a tacit ceiling on attack intensity to avoid systemic overload triggers. If all five align, the system does not collapse. It recalibrates. What does that look like? Neither side wins decisively. Neither side escalates openly, but both sides accept an invisible limit on intensity. This path is possible, but here is the condition that makes it difficult. It requires mutual trust and restraint during a moment defined by mistrust, and history is not generous to that condition. Path 2. Slow, systemic spiral. This is not a collapse in the Hollywood sense. There are no explosions, no single decisive moment. There is only repetition. Each exchange slightly increases interception load. Each interception slightly drains inventory. Each drained inventory slightly increases vulnerability in the next cycle. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, irreversibly, like water eroding stone. This is water-on-stone warfare. And in this scenario, escalation does not look like war declarations. It looks like shorter reaction windows, higher costs per engagement, and increasing reliance on imperfect prioritization algorithms. Years from now, a future generation will ask, how did they not see it coming? But some did. Early analysts at multiple defense think tanks, quietly referenced in internal briefings from organizations like Reuters, defense correspondents, and regional security desks, flagged multi-vector saturation fatigue as early as 2024. Those warnings existed in writing, and then they were overtaken by confidence in redundancy. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest, but I also thought that before previous escalations stayed contained. And then one night changed the entire calculation. Here's what I keep coming back to. It is 02:14 a.m. over southern Israel, the same hour we opened with, the same sky, the same radar horizon stretching over the Negev, where silence once meant control, because that silence is no longer neutral, it is loaded. What looked like a stable defense architecture is now something more fragile and more complex, a system that is still operational, still advanced, still capable, but no longer unchallenged in its assumptions about time, volume, and endurance. This is where the real shift happened, not in explosions, not in headlines, but in the moment a system realized it can be overwhelmed without being broken. That is the paradox. An air defense network is not a wall. It is a living coordination system, radars, interceptors, command layers, human decisions. And like any living system, it does not need to be destroyed to be changed. It only needs to be pushed past the limits it was designed to assume would never arrive at the same time. This is not a political figure. This is a fire alarm. And it is ringing in a building that was never supposed to be burning from multiple floors at once. The core thesis remains unchanged. Israel's air defense is not failing because it is collapsing. It is being tested by a model of warfare that does not aim to break it, only to exceed it. And systems like this were never guaranteed permanence. They were temporarily cooperating with conditions that no longer fully exist. So the question is not whether the system is strong. The question is, can any defense architecture remain reliable when the assumptions it was built on no longer match the reality it is facing? Or is even the most advanced shield in modern warfare always just one coordinated night away from becoming something else entirely? Share this with someone who still thinks this is just another regional escalation story. It is not. It is a case study in how modern warfare is shifting from destruction to system stress at scale, and why that changes everything about how power is measured in the 21st century. Because once you understand that shift, you stop reading headlines the same way again. Now 3 questions, 3 different perspectives, 3 different angles on the same unfolding reality. Q1. Analytical. If multi-layer air defense systems are being tested through saturation rather than direct defeat, what does that imply about the next generation of interception technology? And can any system realistically scale fast enough to match low-cost, high-volume aerial networks? Q2. Accountability. When governments publicly describe these systems as highly effective, but internal reports acknowledge increasing saturation strain, where does responsibility lie for preparing civilian populations for the gap between performance claims and operational limits? Q3. Philosophical. If even the most advanced defense systems are ultimately constrained by cost, timing, and volume rather than pure technology, is technological superiority ever truly stable? Or is it always vulnerable to becoming temporary advantage? If this level of coverage matters to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Like the video if you want more deep breakdowns like this, and comment. I read every single one, especially the ones that challenge the analysis. This channel exists to cover the stories that are real, that have stakes, and that require more than a surface-level explanation to understand what is actually happening. Stay sharp.